Hello, Brovs. I bought this book today at an estate sale because, for obvious reasons, it says Napoleon, the Bisexual Emperor, minus the, written by a Major General Frank Richardson, MD. 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 This guy was so talented that he was a Major General and a doctor. No, I don't really know much about Napoleon. I'd never heard the theory that he was bisexual. Not that I really care, but the topic is just kind of bizarre, especially for like 1974 when he wrote this book. And 1972. First published in 73. Napoleon, as a public figure, is a well documented and familiar subject. Far less familiar is Napoleon, the private man, with the hopes, fears, and failings, both emotional and physical, that formulated the ambition and drive that led him to the imperial throne. General Richardson has written a most remarkable book. It makes no wild assertions, and I think he has proved his case regarding Napoleon's bisexuality. But the book is something more than a medical psychoanalytical investigation. It presents an illuminating history of a complex man of genius who bestrode the world like a colossus and whose amazing career can never cease to fascinate us. Cecil Roberts, Books and Bookmen. Approaching the curious emperor both as military man and as doctor, he has come up in his engrossing book with a theory that I find absolutely convincing. Readers who find such discussion of a great man to be distasteful may take comfort from the fact that Napoleon himself often and publicly discussed his sex life and boasted about his conquests. General Richardson treats his subject as sympathetically and unsensationally as possible, but his theory explains much of the mystery of Napoleon. It is also of vital historical importance. Other conquerors, from Alexander the Great to Caesar to Hitler, have exhibited similar sexual maladjustments. Graham Lord, Sunday Express. The author has devoted 10 years to the study of the personal and sexual side of Napoleon's life and how these factors affected his dedication to military supremacy. Wonder if he concludes that that's why he lost eventually. The physical aspect is discussed in Napoleon's relations with his two wives, Josephine and Marie Louise, and with his mistresses. These, with his relationships with men, result in a new understanding of a complex figure. Guernsey Evening News. This well-researched volume has given everyone with the slightest interest in the greatest foreigner who ever ruled France a great deal to ponder on. It may well be that sexual inadequacy played a more important part than has generally been supposed. Tom Bentley, Yorkshire Post. So strong was the indefinable magic of Napoleon that almost any book on the man is assured of an interested readership. This study of the emperor's sex life is particularly rewarding and should have a special appeal to doctors. Robert Richardson, Hospital, Medicine. I wonder if that's his brother. So strong was the... Oh, I already read that. Jesus Christ. Frank Richardson attained the rank of Major General in the Royal Army Medical Corps, and from 1956 to 61 was Director, Medical Services, BAOR. From his years of experience in dealing with the psychological and sexual problems of the ordinary soldier, he has written with authority and insight of the stresses and sexual inadequacies that impelled Napoleon relentlessly forward to his finally tragic destiny. Very interesting. I mean, it's not so much interesting. The Napoleon aspect is interesting that this guy wrote this book, especially in 1973. Acknowledgements. I don't think I'm reading those because what's it matter? List of illustrations. Introduction. More books have been written about Napoleon than about any other human being, since one author estimated the printed items about the man and his legend at more than 200,000. Many more have been added to the list. By judicious and partisan selections from this wealth of material, one could prove almost any theory about him which one might care to propose. But, as C.S. Forester says in his book, Napoleon and his court, the most one can hope for is to form one's own conclusions about him. One cannot hope to form other people's. In this spirit, I offer some speculations about the psychological processes which could have helped to shape the astonishing character of this great man, which I believe can be supported by reasonable deductions from some facts about his character, his conduct, and particularly his physical makeup, which have so far received little attention. My personal and psychoanalytical approach may excuse the occasional use of the first person singular, the pontifical, almost royal we used to such splendid effect by the 5th Earl of Rosebery, in his great work Napoleon the Last Phase. Though exactly right for a noble lord who found time in an active political career to produce that classical contribution to the Napoleonic literature, hardly accords with the spirit of modern writing. Continued use of the impersonal one gets a little complicated, and to refer to myself as the writer is not only stilted, but presumptuous in one who is making a first foray into this overcrowded field. I dislike what might be called the mused Napoleon kind of book, in which the author presumes to portray the feelings and thoughts of his subject. One might almost say his victim. In one such book recently translated into English, Napoleon and His Ladies, by Robert Hale Limited, the author Monsieur Guy Breton tells us what Napoleon was thinking before, during, and after his adventures in bed with the endless series of women mentioned in the book. Describing Napoleon's preoccupation with shapely rumps, he tells us that they set his palms itching. I should admit that my special interest in Napoleon began in dislike for a great man who could be so petty as to leave money to a Frenchman who tried to assassinate Wellington. But the more I read about him, the more I became convinced that certain unattractive aspects of his character could be explained on psychological grounds, and thus dislike became, to some extent, overlaid by understanding and even pity. Those who are addicted to what has been described by the horrid word Napoleonolatry may be as irritated by any suggestion of pity for the hero as they are by criticism. Pity may seem almost an impertinence, but there were times in his life when his worst enemies could hardly have denied it to him. In any case, he stands serenely on the pedestal of the Napoleonic legend, indifferent alike to pity or censure, with less to fear from any other figure in history from the modern sport of knocking down idols or exposing their feet of clay. Nothing is more astonishing than the growth of the Napoleonic legend, which has laid succeeding generations so completely under its spell that it is a shock to realize that even when Napoleon was at the pinnacle of his fame, he was hated by millions of Frenchmen. What about French women, buddy? Our experience of wartime propaganda enables us to understand the virulence and the intemperate language with which English writers reviled Boney, but it is surprising to learn how hostile were many French writers even during his lifetime. The subject is brilliantly surveyed by Professor Peter Gile in his book Napoleon Far and Against, which is indispensable to an understanding of what Napoleon has meant to the French. Since the publication of this book in 1949, 3 names have been added to the list of French authors who are hostile to Napoleon. Jean Savant, Maximilian Vox, and latest and bitterest of them all, Henri Guillemot. But the most recent English biographer, Vincent Cronin, is that handsomely? Randomly, or is that randomly? Randomly redresses the balance with his portrait of Napoleon of heroic proportions. Sorry, I'm not fucking. What's that guy? Who's that guy from Cheers? Kelsey Grammer. Monsieur Guillaume, writing in 1969, cannot find one good word for the Corsican brigand. An equally abusive author is in our own country is Conall O'Riordan, who dedicated his book 1953 to Napoleon's unnumbered devotees who know everything about him except the truth. What is the truth about Napoleon? The French academician, I can't say it, mission, Jacques Bainville, one of his great biographers, expressed the opinion that despite the numerous psychological portraits of Napoleon which have been attempted, he always escapes from the pages in which writers have sought to confine him. This may be because such writers have failed to follow the proper sequence, which is essential in making any psychological diagnosis. This must begin with the recording of a careful history followed by a thorough physical examination. These steps are represented by my first two chapters. And in the third and fourth chapters, special psychological factors in Napoleon's life are examined, bringing us to the point at which it is possible to form an opinion about the psychological pattern of his life, the story of his relations with women and men seems to fit very well into the anticipated pattern. Since Frederic Masson wrote Napoleon and the Fair Sex, there have been several books with familiar titles, but by including a chapter on Napoleon and the male sex, I'm breaking some new ground, which may be an excuse for writing yet another book on Napoleon. To attempt a psychological diagnosis of Napoleon in defiance of Bainville's opinion may be rash, but it is mainly things said by Napoleon himself which embolden me to try. The American critic Susan Sontag considers that the great writers of France have been concerned to a singular extent with the detached presentation of intimate feelings, particularly those connected with sexuality and ambition. These subjects obsessed Napoleon. This book is not just a chronicle of 19th century scandal, but a serious attempt by a doctor to understand what the French surgeon Lieutenant General Raoul Brice called the riddle of Napoleon. It may seem that my selection from the extensive literature of this period of history has been unduly partisan and designed to expose the unpleasant side of Napoleon's nature. Glimpses of his better side are seen, but few would deny that in him aggressiveness predominated, and the butcher's bill for this was enormous. If we could all control aggression and show to the world only our better nature, there would be little need for psychiatrists. It is particularly for the unpleasant side of Napoleon's character that psychological explanations must be sought. A useful contribution to the study of military leadership and the growth of dictatorship would be made by anyone who could accurately define what gave Napoleon his magnetic sway over the hearts and minds of men, what made thousands of Frenchmen follow him to death or glory even after he had lost and abandoned 3 great armies. I cannot say that in researching into Napoleon's private life, I was at first prompted by any such purpose as the study of leadership or the pathogenesis of dictatorship. But some reflections on this broader theme naturally emerge from the study of such an outstanding leader. For the world it is important that never again should one man's ambition lead to war. But to extract from that story of the growth of Napoleon's power and his legend a prescription for averting such a catastrophe demands psychoanalysis of the French nation in his day and of the people of the satellite countries who followed his eagles. I have made only brief comments on that theme. The analysis of Napoleon's character is a sufficiently awe-inspiring challenge. Hilaire Belloc condemned the wretched pedantry of reference which has half killed history in our time by saying that anything in this book which is not plainly an expression of my personal opinion, or for which no reference is given in the text, is to be found in the list of books at the end of this book. I am following the example of several previous writers on the subject of Napoleon.